Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. It is another Journey with Jerry. And we're going to cover one of my favorite books, the Book of Esther. It's right up there with the Book of Ruth. It is a big favorite of mine. How much of a favorite it is? Now, up on the screen there is a picture of my Queen Esther Ruth. That's how much I loved these books, that I would name my pets after. Such an awesome book. Now, this book is just, it's got so much in it. It's got intrigue, palace intrigue. It's got history in it. It's got a plot to take out a bunch of people. It has got divine reversals. It's got everything in it, and it's so well written. And one of the most amazing things about this particular book is that it almost doesn't even make it into biblical canon. Now, what I have here, and you have in your little packets, is a little, you have the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and then you have the Protestant Old Testament. So you have both the Old Testament. And you see in the order and the placement of where these books fall. Esther, in the Hebrew Bible, falls over here under the writings. Okay, so you got the Tanakh. This is divided into three. You got the Torah, the T, under Tanakh, which is the law, the first 5 books. And then you got the Nevi'im, the prophets, which is the N. And then you've got the Ketuvim, which is the writings. Esther falls under the 5 scrolls, under the writings. And the writings, the 5 scrolls, and they are usually for the festivals. They're called festival scrolls also. They're usually read at certain times of the year. Like Song of Songs is read during the Passover. Ruth is read during the Feast of Weeks. Lamentations is when the destruction of Jerusalem, the 9th of Av. Esther, of course, is during Purim. And then Ecclesiastes is the Feast of Tabernacles. So they each have in the Tanakh a placement. But also take a look at how we set everything up. Esther comes under here, under the history between after Ezra and Nehemiah. And then you've got the prophets. You got to separate into major prophets and the minor prophets. Over here, they just put them under the prophets, under the former prophets and the latter prophets. But you're going to notice one big difference in the prophets. Daniel is put under the major prophets in the Protestant Bible. It is not in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Old Testament. And it's their reasoning for that is because he doesn't have the office of a prophet. That's why they put him over here in the history. Chronicles falls under the history. What else is major difference? Joshua's under the former prophets. The book of Judges, because most of them were prophets and judges. You got Samuel, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and you got Kings, which you have Elijah in there. You have Elisha in there. So you have it all placed differently in the Tanakh and the Old Testament. Esther almost doesn't get in there. And for one of the reasons why it doesn't almost get in there is because there's no mention of God. His name is not mentioned. There's no mention of Torah. There's no mention of temple. There is no mention of Jewish religion. Okay, there was no mention of that. And that was kind of a sticking point when they were putting together the Protestant canonical Bible together. That was kind of a big controversy for them at the time because it doesn't mention God at all. And one of our forefathers of the Protestant faith, Martin Luther, was said to have hated the book of Esther because, and I quote, he deemed it less worthy of being held canonical, and it Judaized too much and contained much pagan naughtiness. Now, if you think about that for just a few minutes, you may as well just throw this whole Bible away because there was a lot of pagan naughtiness. I mean, this whole book is really about the Israelites, how they kept turning away from God and pursuing the pagan gods. It had a lot of naughtiness in it. Not just pagan, but other naughtiness in it. but it almost doesn't make it in there. And like I said, one of the reasons why it doesn't make it in there, because it does not directly describe God's activity in the events that happen, nor does it mention his name. And there are a couple of reasons why this may be. One reason is that Jewish tradition claims that the authorship is Mordecai. He's one of the ones that they seem to think that may have written the book of Esther. They think it could have been Ezra. They think it could have been Nehemiah. But if it was Mordecai, who's the author, he wrote the book in Persia while still under King Xerxes. Instead of directly crediting God for the victory of the Jewish people, he may have written the book to better fit their polytheistic, because they were a polytheistic society. They had many gods that they worshiped. And this would have protected him to keep God out of there. Because, yeah, he got rid of Haman, but guess what? There was still a lot of political intrigue. There were still enemies of the Jews in place. A second possibility is that so many of the Jews who did not return from captivity, something like 50,000 came back from captivity, point to their reluctance in identifying with God, with the God of Israel. So there was what they would call a spiritual indifference, a spiritual ambivalence to why it would explain the absence of terms of Torah, temple, prayer, or even Yahweh or Adonai, any of God's names. But the beautiful thing about this story, though it doesn't mention his name, his fingerprints are all over this. And so why I put this up here is so you have an idea of the placement of where they put it and some of the differences. Now, does it change what you learn? Not really. It's just coming at it from a different approach. I kind of like the way the Tanakh is set up because it kind of follows a better flow in terms of where things are falling chronologically. And that's why usually when I do the teachings, I try to give you an historical context. But you also have this, for those of you who are here, it's right there in your little packet, right there for you, that you can look at a different time. So we're going to go into one of my favorite books, the book of Esther, chapter 1, and let's begin. Verse 1 and 2. It was in the days of Ahasuerus, we're going to call him Xerxes, his Greek name, who reigned from India to Ethiopia, Cush, over 127 provinces. In those days, when King Xerxes sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire. Now, who is King Xerxes? Well, he is the son of King Darius, the grandson of King Cyrus. You can also read more about him in the books of Ezra, chapter 4, chapter 5, and chapter 6. You can read about him in Daniel 6:1, actually his father, in Darius in Daniel 6:1 and 6:25. You can read about in Haggai 1:15 and 2:10. And notice I put a map in there for you, which I had blown up for you. This is the empire of the Persians. One thing you're always going to notice about some of these empires, they never seem to get into Arabia, but they do spread from east to west. And now as we go on, I'm going to explain something here and what the big meaning here with this map is. Verse 3 to 5. In the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. This is one of the first banquets. There are like 7 recorded banquets in this story. He invited all the military officers of Persia and Media, as well as the princes and nobles of the provinces. The celebration lasted 180 days, 6 months. A tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. When it was all over, the king gave another banquet for all the people, from the greatest to the least, who were in the fortress of Susa. It lasted for 7 days, as it was held in the courtyard of the palace garden. Now, there's a specific reason why he's doing this. It isn't just to display his majesty. He's actually campaigning. What is he campaigning to do? Well, his father failed to take over what is Greece right in here. And with the help of the Athens and the Spartans, they were able to push Darius back. And for at least 10 years, one of the things with Xerxes is that he has someone whispering in his ear every day saying, you need to avenge your father. You need to avenge the Greeks. You need to go. And so this whole celebration is to garner supplies, men, finances. He's actually mounting a big campaign, which, by the way, will end up being disastrous. So I just thought I'd tell you that right now. But that is the real point of his opulent display there. He's trying to puff out his chest and just show off also. In verse 6 to 9, the courtyard was beautifully decorated with white cotton curtains and blue hangings, which were fastened with white linen cords, purple ribbons, to silver rings embedded in marble pillars. Gold and silver couches stood on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. I mean, this is opulent. Drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs, and there was abundance of royal wine reflecting the king's generosity. Now, these goblets, they were one of a kind. Each one of them was like a unique gift, very uniquely designed. By edict of the king, no limits were placed on the drinking, for the king had instructed all his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. At the same time, on another side of the palace, Queen Vashti gave a banquet, here's the third banquet, for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. And right there, folks, the minute you start getting alcohol involved, it's all downhill. So verse 10 and 12. On the seventh day of the feast, when King Xerxes was high in spirits, in other words, he was drunk out of his gourd because of the wine, he told the 7 eunuchs who attended him, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, say those 7 times fast, right? To bring Queen Vashti to him with the royal crown on her head. It is taught that only wearing the royal crown on her head. He wanted the nobles and all the other men to gaze on her beauty, for she was a very beautiful woman. Now, once again, remember, they're drinking, they're probably bragging to each other, and so he's going to try to have her come out just wearing her royal robe. And we're going to see that the only person who has any common sense here seems to be Vashti, but it works to her disadvantage, not her advantage. But when they conveyed the king's order to Queen Vashti, she refused to come. This made the king furious, and he burned with anger, which is never good to upset the king. Boo-hoo. But remember, he's drunk out of his gourd, and so is his drinking buddies. Verse 13, 15. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matter of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king: Karshina, Sethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marcina, and Mumokin, the 7 nobles of Persia and Media who had special access to the king. These were the top dogs. These were the guys who had his ear and were the highest in the kingdom. According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti, he asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. And in the next verses, 16 to 20, I specifically chose the Message Bible because it really comes across much better. Mumokin spoke up in the council of the king and the princes. It's not only Queen Vashti, Queen Vashti has insulted, it's all of us, leaders and people alike, in the very last one of King Xerxes' provinces. The word's going to get out. Did you hear the latest about Queen Vashti? King Xerxes ordered her to be brought before him, and she wouldn't do it. When the women hear of it, they'll start treating their husbands with contempt. The day the wives of Persian and Mede officials get wind of the queen's brazenness, they'll be out of control. Is that what we want? A country of angry women who don't know their place? Could you imagine that being played out this very day? There'd be a lot of black eyes out there, okay? Going on verse 19:20. So if the king agrees, let him pronounce a royal ruling and have it recorded in the laws of the Persians and Medes so that it cannot be revoked, that Vashti is permanently banned from King Xerxes' presence. And let the king give her royal position to a woman who knows her place. When the king's ruling becomes public knowledge throughout the kingdom, extensive as it is, every woman, regardless of her social position, will show proper respect to her husband. So it wasn't enough that she insulted the king, it was them too. And by golly, we got to stop that right now. So that was that. Could you imagine, especially in the 70s, do you remember when the whole feminist movement went? You imagine a law being passed like that. It just would not fly. Verse 21-22. The king and his nobles thought this made good sense. So he followed Memucan's counsel. He sent letters to all the parts of the empire, to each province in its own script and language, proclaiming that every man should be the ruler of his own home and should say whatever he pleases. Goodness gracious. Oh, I mean, here's the thing. If you need to demand respect from a person, you don't deserve it. Plain and simple. And the fact that you have to mandate it, you really don't deserve it. And so that's my opinion on that. Chapter 2, verse 1-4. After these things, when the wrath of King Xerxes had subsided, now after these things, there's a period of about 4 years that goes on here. Because why? He's mounted his campaign. He's trying to move into what isn't a unified Greece yet, a bunch of city-states. He's trying to come in here. Disastrous results. He loses his navy. He gets beaten back. It just does not want. He almost gets it, but almost doesn't count, as Jim and I were talking about earlier. Almost doesn't count. But that's what happens after these things. There's a 4-year period there. He remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed against her. So he finally remembers that he's without a queen. The king's attendants who served him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king." These are the guys who know him. They've attended to him his whole life. "Let the king appoint administrators in all the provinces of the kingdom and have them gather together beautiful young virgins to the citadel in Susa," which is the capital, "into the harem under the custody of Haggai, whatever, the king's eunuch, who's in charge of the women, and let their beauty preparations be given to them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king, be queen in the place of Vashti." Now remember, he's come home with his tail between his legs. He's lost his navy. Part of his army's been decimated. He's without a queen. Boo-hoo, poor King Xerxes. He's not doing well. And so this was their idea to try to please him. And it says here, this pleased the king. And he did accordingly. And so they, of course, gather all the women. Now, the Jewish historian Josephus said there was about a total of 400 women selected for this. So it was like a major, the eunuch who has to deal with 400 women from different parts of this empire, he's got a task on his hands. Verse 5-7. There was a certain Jew in the citadel of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Now, some of you will remember Shimei. He was the guy who cursed out David back in 1 Samuel 16. Some of you will remember the son of Kish. Who was also a son of Kish? Saul. There's a relationship there, and they're both Benjamites. They're all Benjamites. Who have been deported from Jerusalem with the captives who have been exiled with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. He was the guardian of Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. The young woman was beautiful of form and face. In other words, she was gorgeous. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Now, there's another place. One of the beautiful things about the book of Esther, you're going to see some similarities with Joseph. And if you look at Genesis 39:6, now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Very similar there. In 1 Samuel 16:12, this is David they're describing. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. So Esther is just something about her beauty, something about her figure. She is gorgeous. Okay. In verse 8 and through 11. As a result of the king's decree, Esther, along with many other women, young women, was brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Haggai's care. Haggai was very impressed with Esther and treated her kindly. He quickly ordered a special menu for her, provided her with beauty treatments. He also assigned her 7 maids, probably one for every day, especially chosen by the king's palace, and he moved her and her maids into the best place in the harem. She had the best apartment. She probably had great chefs. She probably had a trainer. She just had everything. Esther had not told anyone of her nationality and her family background because Mordecai had directed her not to do so. Every day, Mordecai would take a walk near the courtyard of the harem to find out about Esther and what was happening to her. So he's constantly keeping tabs on her. Now, Esther's name in Persian means star. Hadassah, which was her Jewish name, means myrtle. But the name Esther in Hebrew, if you take the root word there, S-T-R, means to hide or conceal, to be hidden. So, yes, right now her identity is being hidden because yet she has yet to shine like the star she's going to shine. So you can see already in the background things are being put in order, people are being put in place. In verse 12 to 14. Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months of oil of myrrh, and 6 months of perfumes and cosmetics. Those 6 months, you would reek. I mean, it would just come out of you. I mean, think about people who smoke for a very long time. Everything smells like cigarettes. Think about people who work in some fast food restaurants. They smell like, I can remember working in a fast food restaurant. I smelled like French fries every night, which was very hard for a dog to be around, by the way. But you would reek of this. Not reek. You would just permeate the oil of myrrh. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem to the care of Shagaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased and summoned her by name. So, one day you're a virgin, you have your night with the king, then you're brought over to the concubine section, and right there, whether or not he took pleasure in you again, you would be basically in prison as you're there. You're not free. I mean, some people say, well, you're in the palace, but no, you don't get to marry anyone else. You're at the king's disposal. That's kind of the kind of hard thing to look at, but you got to look at it in how it was. That's exactly how it was. Verse 15-18. Now as for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her in as his own daughter, when her turn came to go into the king, she requested nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch and attendant, who was in charge of the women, advised. And Esther found favor in the sight of all who saw her. So she's already displaying poise and wisdom here. So Esther was taken into the king to his royal palace in the 10th month, that is, the month of Tebet, which falls between December and January, in the 7th year of his reign. So 5 years have gone by here. Oh, 4 years. 4 or 5 years have gone by here. Now the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the other virgins. So he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen in the place of Vashti. Then the king held a great banquet. Here we go, another banquet. Esther's banquet for all his officials and his servants. And he made a festival for the provinces and gave gifts in accordance with the resources of the king. So he's sort of, been able to restock on his resources because he really got beaten bad in his attempt to take over the Greek Isles and the Greek nation there. So to this point, we see that Esther is being put in place, and that's the beauty. Though God is not mentioned, but we know that she's being put in place. Because all you have to remember is Isaiah 55:9. His ways are higher, his thoughts are higher, and so his plans are better. So verse 19 to 20. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. So he's got a position within the king's gate. But Esther had kept her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai has told her to do so. For she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. So this art of concealment, it's still going on. Why? Because the time has not come. Everything's about timing and everyone knowing when to reveal what needs to be revealed. Verse 21 to 23. One day, as Mordecai was on duty at the king's gate, two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthana and Teresh, who were the guards at the door of the king's private quarters, in other words, these were his bodyguards, became angry at the king and plotted to assassinate him. But Mordecai heard about the plot, gave the information to Queen Esther. She then told the king about it and gave Mordecai credit for the report. When an investigation was made and Mordecai's story was found to be true, the two men were impaled on a sharpened pole. This was all recorded in the book of the history of King Xerxes' reign. Now, I mentioned two were impaled on a sharpened pole. A lot of the English translations like to say hanged on the gallows, but the Persians were notorious for this form of execution. It wasn't the Romans who came up with crucifixion and impalement. These guys did. The Romans perfected it afterwards, but they were, and it was pretty gross in how they did it. Now, if you don't know how they're impaled, take a nice sharpened pole, go up through your bunghole and out, and you're pretty much there for the animals of the air to take you and let you slide down that pole, and you're nothing after that. They were very good at execution. This was just one of the forms that they loved doing. There's a bunch of other, like 17 others, but this was one of their favorites. Now we're in chapter 3, verse 1 to 2. After these events, about 5 years go on here, King Xerxes honored Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor, higher than all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. Now, who is Haman? Haman was a descendant of Agag. Who is Agag? The king of the Amalekites. Who are the Amalekites? Enemies of Israel, dating back to Exodus 17, 14 to 16. Balaam was said to have spoke of Agag in one of his oracles in Numbers 24. Now, what's the story with King Agag? King Saul was told to destroy everything, the Amalekites. Destroy them all. Leave nothing. Leave nothing. What did King Saul do? He did basically a half-assed job. He kept the best things. He kept the best lambs. He kept the best goats. And he saved the king. Instead of following the Lord's command, Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. He took all the best stuff. Who's supposed to get the best? The Lord. But he took all the best stuff. These they were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. So he did not follow the Lord's command. Who ended up chopping down Agag? It was the prophet Samuel. Took him down. Because they did not take care of Agag, family members were able to get away. And now what's happening? It's now catching up. This Haman's going to be part of that first planned Holocaust. So if you had taken care of things here, you wouldn't have been able to deal with it over here. And so this is a big story in regards to that. In verse 4 to 6, day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. He's just not happy enough to kill one man. He's got to make it hurt. He's got to make it hurt through the generations. Verse 7 to 9. In the first month, the month of Nisan, which is the Hebrew month, was back in the beginning was Aviv. In the month of March, April, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, Haman cast the poor, that is, the lot, cast before him day after day to find a lucky day to approach the king. Month after month until the 12th month, the month of Adar, which falls between February and March. And this date that was selected is March 7th. It's going to be 473 BC. Then Haman said to the king, "There's a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in the province of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all the other people, and they do not observe the king's law." Okay, so he's already lying to the king. He's already twisting things, but he's going to get his agenda across. Therefore, it is not in the king's interest to tolerate them and let them stay here. If it pleases the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay the 10,000 talents of silver, which equals to 375 tons of silver, into the hands of those who carry out the king's business to put in the king's treasury. So Haman has cast a lot, but this is Proverbs 16:33. The lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. Okay, he cast a lot. It's going to be March of next year. I've got all this time to plan anything, because remember, this is a vast kingdom. He's got to get the information out there, and then he, of course, still has to get the approval from the king. So here's a question for you. This month is Adar. It actually started the 10th. Now, usually Purim is celebrated in the month of Adar, but it's being celebrated next month. Do you want to know why that is? When it should be this month? Ironically, right now we are into a leap year. We're in a Jewish leap year and a Gregorian leap year. So in the Jewish leap year, it goes from 2 to 3 years. Averages 2 to 3 years. So this year, we're in the Jewish leap year, so they have 2 Adars. This is Adar 1, and next month will be Adar 2. So next month will be the month of Purim, the festival of Purim. So that's why it falls differently when you have a Jewish leap year. We have not a Jewish leap year, but we have a Gregorian leap year, which averages out every 4 years. The Jewish leap year occurs 7 times in a 19-year period. So they average every 2 to 3 years in a leap year. So that's why next month will be Purim. And I also left a little calendar for you when the next Adar 2 will be. And the next one is scheduled to be in 2027. March 8th will be the month of when it will start. So I just gave you a little history right there too. So moving on to verse 10 and 11. So the king took his signet ring from his finger, gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do to the people as you please. This man has no idea what he's agreeing to. He's probably drunk too, but whatever. But he has no idea what he's just agreed to. All he knows is that there's a group of people that aren't obeying his laws, and Haman's going to take care of it for him. I'm going to do you a favor, king. I'm going to take care of these people. Okay? And so he just doesn't know what he's just agreed to. Verse 12 to 15. Then the king's scribes, secretaries, were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, chief rulers, and to the governors who were over each province, and to the officials of the people. Each province according to its script, writing, each people according to their own language, being written in the name of the king, and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by couriers through all the provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women, children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, which would fall on March 7, 473, to seize their belongings as plunder. A copy of the edict was decreed as law in every province, was published to all the peoples, so they would be ready for this day. So there's a year for this to play out. But once again, who's really planning everything? That's right. Right in the background. And Haman is probably, patting himself on the back saying, ha ha, I've got him. But, that's exactly what Satan has done, especially with God's plan. He thinks he's got him cornered, and God's just luring him in. It's beautiful. That's why I love this story. You just see how he's just getting him. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa, while the king and Haman sat down to drink. Here we go. The city of Susa was perplexed by the unusual and alarming decree. What has to be understood here is that for the most part, the Jews and the Persians were pretty much getting along. They kind of let each other be. They were good for commerce. They were good for business and all that. They kind of let each other be. This was perplexing to everybody, not just the Jews, to everyone. And this is all because of an insecure, wounded ego of one little man. Now we're into chapter 4, verse 1 to 3. When Mordecai learned about all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on burlap and ashes, and went out into the city, crying with a loud and bitter wail. He went as far as the gate of the palace, for no one was allowed to enter the palace while wearing clothes of mourning. As the news of the king's decree reached all of the provinces, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted, wept, wailed, and many lay in burlap and ashes. So his reaction is mirrored by the reaction of all the Jews throughout the province, throughout the empire. Verse 4 to 7. When Queen Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply distressed. She sent clothing to him to replace the burlap, but he refused. Then Esther sent for Hatak, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed as her attendant. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why was he in mourning. So Hatak went out to Mordecai in the square in the front of the palace gate. Mordecai told him the whole story, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Now, how did Mordecai get a hold of this? What the amount was? Remember, he worked inside the palace gate. He had ears to the ground. He could hear what was going on, and he probably was able to get a copy of it. And then you notice that Esther is obviously in isolation. She's just a figurehead. Okay, she has no authority. She doesn't get to rule with the king. She has no idea what's going on. And this is why it's such a big deal when she finds out Mordecai is in great distress. Verse 8 to 12. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the text of the decree which had been issued in Susa for the Jews' destruction, so that he might show Esther and explain to her and order her to go to the king to seek favor and plead for him for the lives of her people. Hatak came back and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hatak and ordered him to reply to Mordecai, saying, all the king's servants and the peoples of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner court without being summoned, he has but one law, that he's to be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter, so that he may live. As for me, I have not been summoned to come to the king for these last 30 days. So they told Mordecai what Esther said. So she's explaining, look, I can't just go to him. I'll end up being dead. She's explaining what's going on her end. Well, here's one of the most famous verses here, verse 13, 14. He sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. The first time I ever read this story, I fell in love with it. Because there's just something about the way he says that. It makes it clear to her, no joke, this is real. And let me tell you, once again, here's a similarity to Joseph in Genesis 50:20. You intend to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. Do you see the similarity between Joseph and Esther? She is going to be in a position to save the lives of many people. And Joseph had a difficult position that he had to be in before he got to his royal position. She is now in a position. Verse 15, 17. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all the Jews who are here in Susa and fast for me. This is as close to a religious anything that they even get to when they're speaking here. Do not eat or drink these 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. This story is I just love this story. I just love this story because you just sense the dramatic climax that we're getting to. It's just, what do they call it? Dramatic tension that's building up right here. Chapter 5. This is the last chapter we're doing this month. Verse 1 to 5. On the third day, Esther put on all her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. When the king asked, What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom, it will be given to you. If it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. Bring Haman at once, the king said, so that we may do as Esther asked. So the king and Haman went to the banquet and that Esther had prepared. Here we go, another banquet. There's a lot of eating in this, by the way. Now in Genesis 41:14, here's something. Here's another similarity to Joseph. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. So for 3 days, Esther has fasted and prayed, and she's probably been in sackcloth. She's been in mourning because she's gone to pray. But before she approaches the king, she prepares herself, she gets herself ready. Now, there was a movie about 20 years ago that came out, One Night with the King. And the one scene that I absolutely hate in this whole thing is that Queen, she's just dripping wet with water, and she's just disheveled. That was the part I absolutely hated about the movie, because you're not to go before the king. There had to be an appearance. You had to do a preparation. Joseph did. He was pulled out of prison, shaved, got himself all cleaned up to go before the presence of a king. And so Esther showed so much courage. She showed so much poise. She showed a lot of wisdom in doing what she did. And she just stood there waiting to be recognized. She didn't do this. She didn't do anything. She just stood there waiting to be recognized. And you don't think God kind of like tapped Xerxes and said, "Yo, there's your woman"? I mean, you don't think that happened? I'm pretty sure it did. That's just me. Verse 6 to 8. And while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "Now tell me what you really want. What is your request? I will give it to you, even if it's half the kingdom." Esther replied, "This is my request and deepest wish. If I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request and do what I ask, please come with Haman tomorrow to the banquet. I will prepare for you. Then I will explain what this all is about." Now she has a chance to say exactly what's there. Either it just can't come out, she can't formulate the words, but what is it about? God's timing. Something else has to be put into place. And this is where more, dramatic tension builds up. Verse 9 to 13. Haman was a happy man as he left the banquet. Of course he is, because it's the king and Haman. And Haman, of course, is all puffed up. "Ha ha, the queen invited me to eat with her." Well, that's not going to last. But when he saw Mordecai sitting at the palace gate, not standing up or trembling nervously before him, Haman became furious. However, he restrained himself. Now, God's hand's here too, restraining Haman, because everything has to be put in place. And so Haman went home. Then Haman gathered his friends and his wife Zeresh, and boasted to them about his great wealth, his many children. He had 10 sons. He bragged about the honors the king had given him, and how he had been promoted over all the other nobles and officials. Then Haman added, "That's not all. Queen Esther invited only me and the king himself to the banquet she prepared for us." I mean, he's really boasting it up here. "And she has invited me to dine with her and the king tomorrow." And then he added, "But this is all worth nothing as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting there at the palace gate." Oh, boo-hoo. I mean, poor Haman. He's got everything. He's got riches. He's got 10 sons. He's got property. He's got the king's ear. He's got the king's signet ring. He's got the attention of the queen. And this one guy is just putting him out. So verse 14, the last verse of the day. So Haman's wife Zeresh and all her friends suggested, "Set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall. And in the morning, ask the king to impale Mordecai on it. When this is done, you can go on your merry way to the banquet with the king." This pleased Haman, and he ordered the pole set up. Oh, boy, what a place to end, huh? But Zeresh, his wife, should remind you of Jezebel. Jezebel and Ahab. You remember that she would be willing to help Ahab get what he wanted? She's helping him, Haman, to get what he wants. And what does he really want? He wants to get rid of Mordecai, but also his people. And it isn't enough to just kill everyone. He's going to make a public, humiliating display of Mordecai. This sounds very familiar, where Satan has tried for years to take out Messiah. And when he thought he had him on the cross, what happened? Divine reversal. So next month, we will continue with part 2. But from now until then, if any of you are interested, I think Amazon Prime has the Bible stories, the Esther story. This is one of my favorite ones. This was done in 1999. It's one of the ones that is more faithful to the book, and it's not overly dramatic, but it stays very faithful. It has F. Murray Abraham in it, so very famous actor, Louise Lombard. So, and I think it's free on Amazon Prime right now if you have Amazon Prime. So I would suggest, it's one of my favorites. I think you'll enjoy it too. Like I said, this is one of my favorite stories. It is. I just love the dramatic tension that's built up. I love what we're going to see next month. I don't want to spill too much because, anyways. But anyways, folks, that's it for today. But next month, we'll be back here with Journey with Jerry. May you go out there in peace. May the Lord be with you as you drive home. May the Lord be with you as you lay your head on the pillow tonight. And may he grant you sweet, sweet sleep. And everyone who's out there listening, Lord, be with them. Protect them. I plead the blood of Jesus over everyone. Oh, the sound of my voice. And I thank you.